Crippled by Culture, where we talk about everything in life and relate it to the disabled and chronically ill community. My name is Sean Gold, and I am an author, advocate, and nonverbal public speaker for for the disa for the disability community. Apologies, Sean. To provide a quick visual description for my accessibility, I am a Black man with a white tracheostomy breathing tube in my neck. I am wearing a blue shirt with a crew neck, and the person off camera is who you hear speaking for me. This video is of a Zoom call with me and the person talking for me off camera, and my guest is in the other box next to it. Before we jump in, I just want to give a quick shout out to Brandon Lingle for being my voice transcriber for this episode. Thank you so much. Today, we're talking about the intersections of disability, self-advocacy, women with ADHD, and centers for independent living. And I'm really excited for this one.
Me too.
So, so let's get into it and meet today's awesome guests. Jodi Hausen is an award-winning journalist and storyteller with decades of media experience. After being diagnosed with ADHD later in life, she began focusing her work on amplifying the voices of people often left out of the mainstream media. Jodi serves on the board of Center for Independent Living in Montana and volunteers with organizations like Special Olympics and Eagle Mount Bozeman. She also writes the Substack newsletter for More Than Normal, where she explores powerful stories and insights around disability and access. Hi, Jodi. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I have to admit, as I said before we started recording, a little nervous, I guess, but I know this is just I'm not a public speaker per se. I'm learning how to be a public speaker, so um, and I'm usually on the other side of the mic. I'm usually the one doing the interviewing because I'm a journalist. So this is a little different for me. Um,
Well,
and
welcome to it. We will flow just like any normal conversation. I'm just Sean's voice. He has written all the questions and he may jump in with any questions as we go throughout the conversation. So sit back and relax and enjoy the ride.
do you want me to
Um,
describe myself?
yeah, actually, that's the next thing. Would you mind giving us a visual description?
Right. So I'm a white woman. I don't want to say my age, but I'm old. Um, young at heart, though. I'm wearing my hair is brown and it's pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing a pair of like glasses that are oval shaped and green frames. And I am wearing a blue sweatshirt with the Ability Montana logo on it, which is gold and white. And Ability Montana is the Center for Independent Living that I am on the board for.
Awesome. Thank you, Jody. I appreciate that. First, do you identify with having a disability or chronic illness?
Absolutely.
Do you mind sharing what disabilities or chronic illnesses you have?
You don't just ask a yes no question. That's the thing you learn in journalism world. I'm just goofing on you. Yeah, I have ADHD, the hyperactive type. You'll probably see me fidgeting around because that's what I do. And I also have a little bit of dyslexia, which I find more entertaining than a challenge, to be honest. Um, but I think to me, the dyslexia and the ADHD seem to be the same thing in a way. I think my dyslexia is born out of a lack of attention sometimes. Because when I'm focused, I don't have any trouble reading. So it's actually kind of interesting. Um, I can't remember, Sean, did you ask me like how it affects my daily life? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of getting to the next question.
Oh
Yeah.
no, sorry.
No.
I,
You did great studying.
well, okay, so I didn't, and I know this is a later question, but I'll just answer it now. I didn't learn because it is salient. Um, I didn't learn that I have ADHD until I was in my mid 50s. And and the reason that the way that that happened is I was working for a daily newspaper and I was going through perimenopause And women going through perimenopause, I mean, there's all these jokes about it, hot flashes and all that stuff. I was having it all, but um, perimenopause affects the estrogen levels in your body, which is, well known. But estrogen also affects the levels of dopamine in your brain, and as in there's less of it. I was undiagnosed at the time when I started going through all this, and it turns out that um, one of the effects of ADHD is that it there's less dopamine level in an ADHD brain than there is in a neurotypical brain, and so it was kind of like a double whammy, and it just I was literally a hot mess. I was having hot flashes, not sleeping, and all that stuff. And so it really it, and I was misdiagnosed, which is really, really, really common for women in particular. But it's very common to be misdiagnosed if you have ADHD as having bipolar disorder, which is, I could understand how the misdiagnosis could happen, but also I felt like the healthcare practitioner that gave me that diagnosis and wanted to put me on lithium, by the way, which is a pretty serious medication, and I refused to go on it. Um, and I said to her, I'm like, wait, you're telling me I'm bipolar? And she said, well, I don't want to focus on the diagnosis. I want to focus on treating the symptoms. She'd only met me a couple times at that point, and I was really, really depressed because I had to take a medical leave from my job. I was sitting around on the couch just feeling sorry for myself, not knowing what the heck was going on. And I hadn't the antidepressants hadn't kicked in yet the first time I met her. And the second time I met her, they had, and I was like, and I was like all over the place. And so I can understand where she made that. I don't want to say diagnosis even, but where she came to that conclusion. But she didn't even ask me any questions like, have you ever purged? Do you have an eating disorder? Like any of the things that would indicate that I had bipolar. And so, long story short, I ended up leaving that practice eventually and finally getting diagnosed by a psychiatrist who made me read Dr. Ned Hallowell and John Rady's book, Doctors. Ned Hallowell and John Rady, and they're both psychiatrists. Ned Hallowell is pretty well known in the ADHD world. He's a psychiatrist with ADHD himself, and he's charming as heck. Um, and my psychiatrist wouldn't diagnose me until I read the book. And I'm the book that Ned Hollowell wrote. I think it might have been his first one with John Rady, and it's called Driven to Distraction. And it's a really, I highly recommend it to anybody who suspects that they might have ADHD because there really aren't any clinical, chemical, what have you, ways of testing for ADHD. It's really, which is that's problematic in and of itself. I'm not going to get into that's way too, because that's not what we're here to talk about. But I was reading that book and it's a bunch of case studies. And so it was really interesting because I was reading the book. I'm like, oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. Like almost every single one of the people that he profiled in that book, I could relate to. Not all, but almost all of them. And so now I forgot what the question was. Oh, everyday life. So
Yeah.
yeah, so um, it affected my life significantly before I knew I had it, which was 5 decades plus. Um, I had managers that always tell me that I had time management issues. And I even recognized, and it was so funny because I used to say to people, I'm task oriented, I'm not time oriented. And that's my
Understood. Yeah.
superpower, right? That's my superpower, hyper focus, right? Like I can work on something for hours and not get up from my chair or, you know, like when I get into that realm, and it's almost like being, I don't want to say high, but it's like almost being in an alternate state, you know?
Locked in.
And
Right.
yeah. And it's really, I mean, it's very powerful. By the same token, when you get into that hyper focus mode and you're a perfectionist, you miss deadlines a lot. Not such a great thing for a journalist that's working for a daily newspaper. Um, and I always had these, people tell me that I had time management issues, and I never understood why because I felt like I was very organized. And then when I got the ADHD diagnosis, I was like, aha. So nowadays, so I have not had a real job since I've been diagnosed, since before I've been diagnosed.
How old
Um,
were you when you were diagnosed?
in my mid 50s, I don't really want to say exactly, but
Understood. Yeah, completely. And was this diagnosed by your professional, or was this after reading the books and kind of a self-diagnose?
well, both. I had, I'd gone to see him for the first time, and I'm like, I wonder if I have ADHD. And he's like, you need to get this book and read it, and then we'll talk at your next appointment. And so I read it, and I went back, and I'm like, yep. And he gave me the little survey, and this was the psychiatrist. He gave me the little survey, and I won.
Did you feel like there are other things going on that you feel like were not diagnosed, or is it just was it just ADHD and this diagnosis really helped you
Oh,
understand what was going on?
oh my God. Well, yes, there were other things going on as a result of, and I know this is a later question also, but internalized ableism, in a way, but really ableism from the exterior, people. But I mean, can you call it ableism when you don't even know that, a disability exists? I don't know. Um,
Yeah,
so maybe yes, well, we'll get to that, I guess. But
right.
um, no, I forgot what you asked me. Oh, other things. Yeah. So I was very depressed, as I said at the time. I was taking antidepressants. I struggled with a lot of anxiety. Um, and but those were those actually anxiety is something that I've always struggled with, but I didn't realize that I did. I don't know how to explain that, but
Hmm.
like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think there was anything undiagnosed, but to answer the other part of the question, like getting that diagnosis was like mind blowing. I call it my epiphany because it explained everything. It explained why all these, because once I got the diagnosis, I started reading about it and blogging about it. And a lot of what you see in my newsletter is stuff that I had written on my blog back in, well, now I'm going to divulge my age, but 10 years ago. Um, and, like, I started learning more about what ADHD is and how it affects people. There's a great online magazine, and I don't know if it's in print, but it's called Attitude Magazine, ADD,
Oh, okay.
Attitude Magazine,
Hmm.
and it's fantastic. It's because it's written by and for people with ADHD, and the parents of and teachers of and whatnot. Um, and I learned so much just from reading, and I quoted a lot, especially I quoted it a lot in my early days. But it just made me realize how much, and I don't like to call it a disorder because I don't see it that way. I see it as something that's just different, like I'm neurodivergent or what have you. My neurodivergence is just different. It's not because I think that calling attention deficit, calling it an attention deficit is a misnomer because
Hmm.
as I already talked about, hyper focus. I mean, that's that's like the opposite of being distracted. So like I find that kind of insulting in a way.
Yes.
Um, but it it is what it is. So and I don't mind telling people I have ADHD. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times I tell them because I get excited really easily. I have to this day still, even after knowing what I know and learning what I've learned and trying medications and all that stuff, like the way it affects my everyday life now, is that I sometimes have trouble with executive functioning. I get really passionate about things.
Yeah.
And
And you touched on that earlier for sure too. And with your job and it affecting deadlines, and doing your job, how does it feel when you don't meet your deadlines now after you've gained understanding that it's all due to ADHD?
oh no, first of all, I never use it as an excuse, just an explanation. Um, but that doesn't happen anymore. because here's the great thing. Once you
Amazing.
know you have it, like I said, like, when I was diagnosed, I'm like, it was not only an epiphany, I'm like, okay, I've got this. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people with ADHD do. I think there's something about people with ADHD, they are very resilient, and they sometimes do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's the
Hmm.
definition of crazy, right? But not to be ableist to other disabilities, um, when I learned that, I was like, not only did it explain everything that came before and what was happening to me at the time, and then I learned about the dopamine thing and the estrogen levels and all that, and I was like, oh my God. I started to, read Attitude Magazine and I started to find ways to better handle my time management. And honestly, I'm really hesitant to talk about medications,
Hmm.
but they do help for some people. And I don't think everybody, and to be honest, I don't even take the medication every day. But it does help. And there was a really interesting article in the New York Times a few weeks ago, like a month ago or so, about ADHD. But that's, and anyway, that really questions whether or not the medication is
It's
good
helping.
long term. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
understood.
but they were talking about kids mostly. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, I don't live, so the answer to the question about deadlines is like that doesn't happen anymore. I fool
Amazing.
myself. I put deadlines on my calendar like a day or two before. Um, although I did come really, really close recently with the grant that I was talking about, but we'll talk about that later, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, we kind of touched on, your internalized ableism a little bit with just how your process of being diagnosed with ADHD and your process. But tell me a little bit about did you have to go through, what was your internalized ableism like, and how has that journey been towards your inner acceptance?
hmm. I think I think when you've when you've had a disability your whole life and then you suddenly find out that you have a disability, I actually had numerous conversations well, so what happened was I started writing about ADHD and then I was like, and I was already volunteering with Eagle Mount Bozeman, which is a recreational program for people with all kinds of disabilities. Sean, you could come, we can get you out skiing. Um, anyway, and anybody, I'm telling you, we could get you out skiing. Um, but I started finding uh, other disability advocates. I mean, I wouldn't have even called myself an advocate at the time, but I decided like that was, and I'd already always been an ultra sensitive person and always like, you know, like cheered for the underdog in movies and books and always,
Hmm.
I don't like to see anybody suffer and anybody or anything suffer. And so, um, so I took up the flag of disability rights as a result. And I'm really just starting to, I joined the board for Ability Montana a couple of years ago. And so I'm only just starting to get into my like true advocacy, but I decided that's what I was going to focus my reporting on.
And what was that? What was the one thing, if you had to say it was a one thing, an internal feeling or an external driver, what was that made you consider having advocacy as a career involving the disability community?
Well, I think the biggest thing that happens, and this is not uncommon for people with ADHD, is that I mean, I'm learning through my therapist is like she does this. She goes, got a big ball of shame because she has ADHD also, and it's like
Mm.
there's a lot of shame around. We fail a lot because we also tend to be risk takers, and so when you're a risk taker, you're going to fail, right? And so
Hmm.
failing a lot leads to feeling dejected and despondent sometimes. But I don't know if that's what drove me. I think because had been with the Eagle Mount for volunteering with them for I don't know how many years, 6 years or more, um, when this occurred. I think being around people with disabilities, people that I worked with a lot of kids with autism that were nonverbal, and I learned how they communicate. Oh my God.
Mm.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna diverge for just a second here. Have
Yeah,
you
please.
have you been listening to the telepathy tapes? Have you heard about this? Oh, oh my God. So fascinating. It is so fascinating. There's this woman who's doing a documentary film about Kai, I can't remember her last name, but anyway, she's doing a documentary film about nonverbal, well, spellers. So kids with autism who can't speak but are spellers, right? So they use different devices to spell.
Hmm.
They can communicate telepathically, not only with each other, but and they've done all these, it's just, you got to listen to it.
Wow.
It's so fascinating. Oh my God, it's just been blowing my mind. Ah, it's paradigm shifting.
Yeah,
Uh,
how fascinating.
oh my God, you have no idea. And like, I'm speechless, obviously. It's incredible. Um, but anyway, I mean, I
Please,
learned that
yeah,
these
can
kids
you
with, go ahead.
send the information
Oh,
to Sean,
sure.
please?
But anyway, I love it. And what I recognize, so I'll tell you a little story about Eagle Mount, if I could. I was skiing with this young lady who had a twin, both of them autistic and nonverbal. And I was skiing with her, and we had her on tethers. So there were two volunteers, myself and the other volunteer was tethering her. We take turns. And
Hmm.
I'm skiing next to her, and I'm yelling her name, and I'm like trying to get her to turn a little bit. So like we try to keep a loose tether to like a lot of autistic people learn by kinesthetic learning and by doing. And so um, I was trying to get her to turn by like skiing next to her and like a little in front and like waving, like, come here, like, and it was a beautiful day. And she, she loved the feel of the wind in her face and the sun in her face.
Hmm.
And she just looked up at the sky. And this young lady, she had words, like single words. She would say like, happy, 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 or ski, stuff like that. She looks up at the sky, her hair, closes her eyes, her hair like blowing in the wind, and she goes, I'm so happy.
Oh,
Oh, and I am telling you, like that moment was like so awesome.
oh
And it
my
made me
gosh.
realize, I know, and it made me realize that it's not them, it's not the people that are nonverbal that are the problem. And this goes into the whole society. I mean, this is exactly what you're talking about, society who's crippling us, right?
Hmm.
Um, and we started to realize that she was impatient and that we figured out her ways of communicating. We started to, not that we heard her telepathically, as some teachers do in that telepathy tapes, um, but we recognized her sounds and her physical manifestations on when she was getting frustrated or you know when she wanted something. Um,
Wow.
yeah.
How
So
fulfilling.
right, and I don't know if that's what drove me to become an advocate, but I I I think I've always been an advocate. I was actually just thinking about this yesterday. My degree is in elementary education, and when I did my student teaching, um, I had to do a social studies, what do you call it, topic. I had to teach a whole unit on social studies, and I chose, and this was way before. This is back in the early 1980s, and I don't know what prompted me to go there, but I did a whole unit on disabilities with
Mm.
third graders. And I took all these books out of the libraries that they could read. It turns out that one of the kids in the class, this was in Baltimore, Maryland. One of the kids in my class, her aunt, I think, was a sign language interpreter for the local news. And we got her to come in and speak to them. And I learned a little bit of sign language as a result. And I taught them the languages. This is my name. Um, and and so I taught them a little sign language and I taught them thank you and you are my friend. No, that's name, friend. Um, and my name is, and then they'd spell out the name. So they just learned a little bit of sign language. And then I did all these like sensitivity trainings with them, and it's like that was like I was in my 20s,
Yep.
that I was doing that,
Yeah.
and so like I guess I've always been there, and I don't know that I can remember why I did that back then. So I don't know if that answers your question. It really doesn't, because I
Yeah.
I don't really know if I know.
It's a great human.
Thanks.
What's your personal definition of disability?
Oh, this is I hate that question. I really, really just like that question. And I was looking for some, because I've had this discussion. So I've interviewed, are you familiar with Eddie Nadopu? Have you ever heard of him? Oh, Sean, I'm sending you another. Okay, he's going on the list.
Please do.
Um, uh, Eddie was born in Namibia, grew up in South Africa. He was born with a degenerative spinal cord disease, and he went to Oxford and he wrote a book called so I can see if it's handy, but I don't see it anyway. Sipping Dom Perignon through straw, and
Okay. Great
and
title.
he's amazing. He works with the UN now. He's like gone all over the world. And at this point, and I don't know, I haven't talked to him in a while, but um, when he wrote his book, he only had use of one finger. He could speak
Oh,
perfectly
wow.
fine though. He had no trouble speaking, and I did an hour and a half interview him with him, and then I did an interview with him. I've been really lucky. I made a connection with the Christian Science Monitor that has a section called "People Making a Difference," and it took a while for me to find them, but once I found the right editor, I pitched them a story about Eddie, and since then I've been able to interview Tiffany Yu. You know Tiffany though, right? Yeah. Are you in diversibility? Yeah, I thought so. That's how I came upon you, I think. So Eddie wrote this book about going to Oxford
Hmm.
University in a power chair and needing 24/7 PCA, a personal care attendant. For those of you who don't know what that is, um, and so and it was just really, really challenging for him. And so every time I interview other disability advocates, I ask them not that question, but I ask them how they feel about the word disability, because as a writer, it's been a word that's always plagued me because it focuses on the dis, like the
Hmm.
not being able, right? But so many people, and I've now learned to embrace it as a movement and disability pride, as Tiffany talks about. Um, but it's still it still irks me a little bit, but I mean it's my nonprofit is Ability Montana, not Disability Montana, right?
Hmm.
um that's I think and that I mean I think that goes to, so I don't know if I have a definition of disability. I think disability is defined by people that aren't disabled, and that's the problem. Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating. I mean, it's your outlook. This is your perspective. It's I personally, speaking for Brandon, find that very interesting, and Sean, I think, is in agreement. Going back to being nonverbal, Sean, he can relate to this. Sean relates to this in a way, being non-speaking. He can talk, but it's little often understood, which is why he texts. Do you feel that some people who are introduced as nonverbal or non-speaking is because non-disabled people don't take the time to listen and learn how nonverbal people speak and communicate effectively?
Absolutely. That's why this whole telepathy thing is so fascinating, because like the fact that these kids, and they're all kids, but they're adults that are actually having telepathic conversations with these kids that are non-speaking or nonverbal,
Mm,
like it's just mind-blowing. Yes, I feel like the world has gotten, in my lifetime for sure, and if I look at like my grandparents and my parents, has gotten too fast. Um, which is why I moved to Montana in a way. And I moved to Montana because I knew living on the East Coast wasn't good for me. I grew up in New York, and I knew that like, but wait, okay, I'm diverging from the question, as is my want. Um, so yes, I mean, I guess that is my way of answering the question. I think that people don't take the time, don't even like, although I think it's getting better, and I might be in a place, being Bozeman, Montana, that is a little bit more open. And that in a large part is because of Eagle Mount and Special Olympics, which I also volunteer with. Um, we're out on the main mountain here. It's only 15 miles out of town. Skiing is a huge part of our culture here. And although Eagle Mount does other things, we have cycling programs for people with limb differences, that use hand cycles, um, or mostly spinal cord injuries. That's really common around here, as you can imagine. Um, Unfortunately, I shouldn't say that, but it's the truth. But because of Eagle Mount, like we're out on the roads riding hand cycles, we're out on the ski hill, tethering people, and like having people talking or like vocalizing with other things other than words, right? We're out in the public. And I think like because of that, and we also have like 2,000 volunteers every year to run these programs.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so because of that, you know, people like, if you think of all the kids, we have a lot of students from MSU that come from Montana State University that come and volunteer with us because they get free skiing out of it, um, which is not a bad thing. But 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 they also learn about disability. And some of them just do it because they want to learn, they want to do something good for the community. So this community um, is more open, I believe, than a lot of other communities are to disabilities, to slowing down and giving people a chance. So I don't know. I feel like I might be a little jaded to answer that question, but in a short answer, yes, I do believe that that is the case, that people who can't speak or don't speak for whatever reasons are often ignored.
Mm.
It's even worse is like, and I don't know that this happens here, but I mean, I've heard stories of people in wheelchairs that are perfectly capable of speaking and thinking and doing everything else. Like they just have a spinal cord injury, right? And they'll go to like a shop or something like that, and the person standing next to them, like the barista or whoever, behind the counter when they're ordering food or what have you, will talk to the person that's standing up as if the person who's sitting down isn't able to speak for themselves. I don't think that
Right.
happens a lot around here, but I know it does happen. And that's just I just think that's cruel
Yeah.
and
Yep.
and ignorant, on behalf of the people doing it.
Right. What do you think, you've had such a long history working with the disability community. What do you think you've learned that stays with you on a daily basis, or a specific disabled person? It can
I
be a
think
two-parter. Yeah, what do you think you've learned that stays with you on a daily basis? And then if you want to refer to a person.
it's hard to pin that down. I thought about that question for as long as I had time to, um, which wasn't much. Um, but I think I've learned resilience, and I think I've learned that um, I'm learning. I'm still learning. I think that's the thing. It's like you never stop learning, right? Um, and I mean, the ADHD never wants to stop learning. I mean, that's part of the joy of being ADHD. It's like my curiosity is, unending. But um, I mean, I think as far as there's so many people. I mean, just like that little girl that I was talking about that I was skiing with, she taught me that just because she's nonverbal doesn't mean she can't communicate.
Hmm.
I think that's
Exactly.
actually one of the biggest lessons I've learned. You know what I mean? Is like that day I turned to the other volunteer and I said, when she said, "I'm so happy," and I looked, and I mean, it just caught me, my heart. And I looked at the other volunteer. I'm like, "Did you hear that?" And I mean, she said it clear as day, perfectly
Right.
enunciated and everything. And I was like, and I said to him later, the other volunteer, and I said, I don't think it's them, it's us. They're not the ones who are disabled. It's us. We need to learn how they communicate,
Hmm.
you know? And
Yeah.
I think that was I think that probably answers that question. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things I learned. Oh, and also I learned stuff about Down syndrome because I've worked with a lot of kids with Down syndrome, Special Olympics and Eagle Mount. And I've learned a lot of like medical things about Down syndrome and why they are um, so drawn to food. Just to give an example, I know this is like a really detailed answer, but and I don't know if this is true of everybody, but um, there's something that doesn't work between. So there is scientific proof that there's a connection between the brain and the gut. And people with Down syndrome, oftentimes the hunger urge or the lack of hunger urge, in other words, their stomach doesn't send the message to their brain that they have food in their stomach, so they're always hungry. And
Hmm.
that's why so many people with Down syndrome are overweight. It's a crazy thing. And I didn't know that. Like, there's all these things that I just didn't know before getting involved with the disability community. I'm always learning more. And it's fascinating. And it's I learned about inspiration porn, and I've written
Yeah.
about that.
Right. Now
Um,
that, sorry, did you have another thought?
well, so I mean, there's been so many people that have inspired me, but like one person I could think of that I'm blaming for getting me on the board for Ability Montana is this guy Kevin Connolly, not the actor. Well, yes, he is an actor. Well, he's not an actor. He's more of a reality TV person. But Kevin Connolly grew up in Helena, Montana, and he was born without legs. So he's like from the hips up. And so he's
Okay.
like 3.5 feet tall. And and he gets around on a longboard, on a skateboard. And he's a friend. And I met him through my work at the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, where I was working for the daily paper. He came out with a book, and I was assigned to interview him about his book coming out. So I had that, and it was just random that happened. Um, and so we've become friends. And then he called me and said, "Hey, do you want to be on the board for Ability Montana?" I'm like, "Well, tell me more about that." And so that's how I ended up on the board. And then, of course, like 3 months after I joined the board, he decided to resign. And I'm like, "Oh, I see what your game was."
And-
But
Oh,
Kevin Connolly, I don't have his book, but he wrote a book called Double Take, because he traveled around the world on his skateboard, and he's a photographer, and he realized that people were like, like go, "Whoa, what's that?" He'd zip by them on his skateboard, and so he started shooting with his camera by his hip and just getting
oh
their
wow.
expressions as they were staring at him. And so that's what his senior thesis was in school, was a photography exhibit, and then he made a book like a memoir out of it. It's fascinating. He's a really interesting guy, really smart, um, and just a sweetheart. So
That
anyway,
is, yeah, that's extremely fascinating. And just going back to the comment you made earlier about people with Down syndrome, it seems like a reasonable explanation, for the the hunger and eating
yeah.
connection.
Well, one of the participants' mothers told me that, so I believe it's true.
Yeah. Well, now that you're involved in the disabled community, why do you think it's important to be a self-advocate and especially as an individual who is disabled?
Okay, I wrote this down because this is so important, but I have to find it. I wrote down, if we don't do it, no one will. That's funny. But it's true. And
It's the truth.
it really is. I mean, I don't think that, I can't put it more succinctly than that. I mean, I just think that's the answer.
Hmm.
Um, because I also think that by speaking about our disabilities and making our voices heard and advocating for what we need, we make the world a more universally acceptable place. Accessible place,
Agreed.
not acceptable. Well, both, really.
Yep. In what ways should disabled people advocate for ourselves? And where would
Ah,
you suggest we start?
yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts about that. I would say, depending on what your disability is, um, if you can find a peer support program, like if you can find peer support, because oh, I have this quote by Judy Heumann. Hold on, I'll find it really quick. Um, when other people see you as a third-class citizen, the first thing you need is a belief in yourself and the knowledge that you have rights. The next thing you need is a group of friends to fight back with. And I know we're going to get into talking about Judy Heumann,
Mhm.
but yeah. So so that's one thing I would say, find peers to fight with you. I think it's important to stand up for what you need. So, an example, I belong to an international writers organization, and we meet on Zoom and we write and we talk and blah, blah, blah. And one of the rooms that they were using on Zoom, the closed captioning was turned off. And I thought, I didn't know why. And it took me like a couple of years before. And like, I need closed captioning sometimes. Like I haven't needed it today because I'm doing most of the talking,
Mhm.
um, but I didn't realize. And I finally said, and this mostly came from actually Tiffany after reading her book. And and her telling me, you need to, if you read her book, um, you know that you need to ask for what you need. And you don't, and one of the interesting things about that is she says that you don't even need to tell them what your disability is. You just have to say, this is what I need. I
Right.
question that a little bit as an American, who is very much about civil rights as well. If you don't divulge that you have a disability, then you kind of lose your rights, like in an employment situation, for example, because you can't sue an employer who's not meeting your disability needs if you have a non-apparent disability like me, if they don't know about it. Um, so I think that's why it's really important to ask for what you need. She says you don't need to divulge your disability. And so in the case of the writers group, I just said, hey, it would really help me if we could have the closed captioning turned on in that room. And they're like, oh, we're so sorry. We didn't realize that it wasn't turned on, and that was just an oversight on their part, so sometimes it's a really simple fix. And the reason I need the closed captioning is not for hearing per se. It's more, I mean, it is in a way, but sometimes have audio processing issues. And this group is based in the UK. And it's all over the world. So people have accents. And if they have accents, sometimes it's really hard for me to understand them. Although I'm used to listening to all different people speak in all different languages or accents and challenges or what have you.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a really good perspective. Uh, our history, the disabled community, is often hidden, overlooked, or ignored in the country. With so much richness in our history, where do you start teaching the history from? Is there a specific time that you focus on first?
Well, I don't know even I haven't really taught. I've done one talk about self-advocacy. Because like I said at the beginning, I'm not really a public speaker. I'm just sort of learning how to do this. Um, but I looked at that question long and hard this morning, and I went back to my self-advocacy talk that I gave. And I think it goes back. I mean, I think the place to start is with Judy Heumann, really. Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, Michael Petrovis, and all the folks in Berkeley. I would say, like, if you want to start anywhere and really learn about the disability rights movement, Judy Heumann's book, Being Human, it's it's such a great read. It's a memoir, but there's also a lot of history in there, and it also talks about the history of the Centers for Independent Living, which is what Ability Montana is. And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but
Mhm.
um, so Judy Heumann would probably be where I'd start. But like if you think about it, so that was like the 1960s and 70s. Um, Roberts, Michael Petrovis, and all these people were going to Berkeley. And Berkeley is really the sort of the epicenter of where the disability rights movement started in the late 60s, early 70s. Um, I could go on and on about history, but so I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much time with that, but um, and I mean, I guess the thing that I just feel like reading about those people and understanding the laws, there are several laws that have been passed um, before and after, well, mostly after. Um, you know, everybody knows about the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, but there's Section 504, which is currently being threatened, the Olmstead Act, which, well, not the Olmstead Act, the Olmstead decision, and just and just learning about Section 504, which the ADA prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities in federally funded or federal government jobs.
Hmm.
504 expanded that definition. And then the IDEA Act, which was the education PL 94-142. So there's like all these acts, but the thing is, they really haven't been, they're there, but it's distressing, A, to know that they're being challenged right now. And they've never really been, until probably the last 10 years or so, that people are starting to like say, speak up and say, no, we need a ramp here, we need, you know, closed captioning or whatever, or a sign language interpreter. Um, we didn't have those things. Uh,
Yeah, and just before you pull that up, Sean agrees with getting started with the disability community and its history. To please start with Judy. Her work with the ADA and just being such a voice for the disability community. Her presence is forever lasting.
yeah, I know. So sad when we lost her. Um, I just give you an example of universal design. The concept is such that any that anything that's designed for people with a specific disability ends up being useful for everybody. So a ramp is a perfect example. I mean, that's called the curb cut effect.
Mhm.
And it started in Berkeley by Michael Pachovis and Ed Roberts when they guerrilla built a ramp onto a sidewalk in Berkeley because they got tired of riding out in their power chairs in traffic instead of being able to get up on the sidewalk. And so Berkeley was like the first curb cut in the US. Actually, it wasn't a curb cut, it was a ramp at the time because they just poured some concrete, I think is what I heard. Um,
Mhm.
but guess what? Curb cuts, everybody, I mean, you probably don't even notice them most of the time, but people with strollers, kids on tricycles, whatever, anybody with wheels, any pulling a heavy suitcase, delivering goods, whatever, like all that stuff is benefiting from the fact that you don't have to lift it up over a curb, right?
Right.
Um, but it goes back, and here's the interesting thing: there are all kinds of examples of of things that were designed for people with disabilities that we all have adopted. Um, and one of my favorite ones is QWERTY keyboards, which is, how you type on your computer, right? The typewriter was originally invented by a guy, by somebody for, I think she was a duchess or something or other, some royalty in the UK, I believe. She had arthritis or something, and she loved to write letters and stay in communication with her friends and whatever. And so somebody invented the typewriter for her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right,
Wow.
right. But like, and like, here's the one more, like the screen to speech to speech to text technology and screen readers. I have friends, I'm involved with the Montana Association for the Blind as well. And I have friends who like have iPhone. I have to say, Apple, as much as I'm not a huge, I'm not going to get into that, but Apple has done a really, really good job at addressing accessibility with their devices. They were like putting in like speech or text to speech long before anybody else was, and that's how my friends get their text messages because they can't see their screen, so they just like, and somehow or another they know where to. It blows my mind.
Wow.
Um, yeah. And the guy, so here's, and just one more example. Oxo Designs, the kitchen
Yes.
gadgets, right? With
Yeah.
like the bigger handles. The guy who invented it was a potato peeler initially, right? That was how it started. And the guy who invented that, his wife had arthritis, and he invented the potato peeler for her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Love the innovations.
I know, right?
And going back to, you touched on Berkeley and the curb cuts and Judy, of course. Did you get a chance to watch the Crip Camp documentary? And what'd you think of it?
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, of course I read that. I think I saw that well before I read the book. Um, what did I think of? It was a while ago that I saw it. I thought it was really cool. I think it was really cool to see because I are you familiar with Tom Olin? You probably are. You don't even know his name, but he was the photographer that shot the Capitol crawl and the sit-ins, the 504 sit-ins, all those black and white photographs. Those are him. That's Tom Olin, and he so I've seen those pictures, and those pictures are like up in almost every center for independent living that you walk into. I don't know if it's like you have to have those up or what it is, but they're really powerful photos. And so seeing pictures of Judy Human and with her 50 save 504 or past 504 signs and all that stuff were really inspiring, um but I think seeing them actually in action
Mm.
was really powerful. Um, yeah, I mean, it was a good movie. I don't want to say anything bad about it, but I mean, I'm a storyteller. There were some things that I felt like were a little maybe redundant, or I don't remember, to be honest. I know there was something that like kind of bugged me on the filmmaking side of it, but it's still so worth watching. It tells a really good story. And like if you don't feel like reading or you can't read or whatever, that's a great way to learn a little bit about. But it doesn't touch on Ed Roberts and well, I think it might, but it doesn't talk about Center for Independent Living, um, or even Berkeley, I think. I don't remember.
Okay.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
no, of course it does Berkeley because that's where the sit-in was. Well, the sit-ins were in a lot of states, but that was the big one. That was one that lasted many, many days.
Well, not necessarily about the documentary Crip Camp, but what has surprised you about our history as disabled people that we should discuss here?
I know I wrote this down. Go ahead.
Oh, and Sean, he's glad that they did it before she passed away.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, for sure. It was quite a few years before she passed away. I think it's been out for a while. I guess like we've already talked about a lot of it, like learning universal design and how. I mean, I think Tiffany's book, the Anti-Ableist Manifesto, is a great primer also on how to advocate for yourself, and how to notice, and not only to advocate for yourself, but also to be an ally. So, like, if you yourself don't have a disability, but you see somebody else being treated poorly, how to advocate for them. So, I think ableism being sort of a newer term. I think it's been used, it's bandied about, I think, for probably more than a decade in the community, but I think it's becoming a more acceptable or accepted term, I hate to say universally, but in common language. I think the other thing to recognize, I think along with, and it sort of ties into universal design, is that disabled doesn't mean unable, and that just because we're maybe different from typical people, but then again, like what the heck is typical? What is normal, right?
Mhm.
Um, just because Sean doesn't you know doesn't speak doesn't mean he's not capable of communication. I mean, this right here is proof of that. But I think the demedicalization of disability treating, I think that's a really, really important thing that we all should be thinking about, that people with disabilities aren't medical diagnoses. They're people living their lives and doing what they do in a different way
Mhm.
because they have to, because the world isn't built for us.
Right. Um, yeah. So, and just touching on, I've never heard of Ed Roberts' name come up a lot. I don't focus on my advocacy around independent living. Can you break it down for me and for anyone else who's new to his impact?
So Ed Roberts, wow, I wish I could have interviewed him while he was alive. Had I known more about him, I would have. You know, it's interesting because Judy, and maybe it's because she wrote a book, and she was such a vocal advocate. Ed maybe was quieter, but they were friends. And Ed is not talked about as much, but he had actually a bigger impact. Well, a different impact, I guess. I don't want to say bigger, but he had a different impact on the disability community because of his fight. Like he sued. So he was born in 1939, I think it was. He got polio when he was 14 and he was paralyzed from the neck down. So he needed, if back then they didn't, I don't know if trach tube would have helped him, but he used what they called an iron lung, these big, massive machines that helped him breathe. And because of that, he applied to Berkeley and was accepted. But then when they found out that he was in this, had to get around with this big giant machine around him all the time, they were like, well, we can't accept you because there's no rooms in the dorms where you would be able to be because that thing won't fit through the doors or whatever. And so
Hmm.
he sued University of Berkeley, or University of California, Berkeley, and was admitted as a result of that lawsuit. So it was kind of a groundbreaking lawsuit. And as a result, he met um, Mike Michael Pachovis, and they were the ones that went out and put the gorilla sidewalk ramp in like overnight. It's a cool story. Um, and he founded what I've been referring to the Centers for Independent Living, but it was a center at the time, and it was founded in 1972 in Berkeley. And what's really, really interesting was that in 1976, Ed was appointed the director of California's Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is the same agency that in 1962 deemed that he was too disabled to work.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? Um, so he was really he was a very vocal and very um, active member, and I'm sure he was in the 504 demonstrations in Berkeley along with Judy and Michael Pachovis and all these other people that were involved. That I think if there's anything powerful about that movie, and I love the fact that it was so couched in the like the civil rights movement. You know what I mean? Like they took their lead from the civil rights movement, and how they fought for their rights. And it's so distressing to me that so many of those rights are being, uh, God, I hope they're not voting on this right now as we're speaking, but uh,
Hmm.
the potential for Medicaid being cut to provide for tax cuts for the rich, um, kind of the anti-Robin Hood movement there.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you tell us a little bit more about the iron lung ventilator? That was that, and you had mentioned it. No.
oh, I just know that they're like a big tube. You can see if you look at pictures of him on the internet, you can just look it up. I can't I don't know how it works, or I think it might be pressurized in some way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I wish I could. I've never really. It's a thing that really it's not used anymore. Um, I think we've gotten more advanced ways of handling. I think that it might have been the trach thing, like having a trach might have helped him. I don't know.
Interesting. Um, Explain universal design to those who don't know. I know we touched a bit on it a lot, here, but if do you have a definition and why is it good or bad for for the disabled people and our accessibility?
So the definition that I took for the presentation that I did, and the presentation was about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, that I did for the statewide Montana Association of the Blind for the Blind convention, and I did a talk about self-advocacy. And so it's also known as inclusive design. and as I said earlier, the curb cut effect. But this is how University of California, Berkeley defines it. The design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible. And this is the key, without adaptation or specialized design. So I think that's the real key to it. And like I said, when you're advocating for something for yourself as a disabled person, you should always bring up universal and inclusive design. So that way it starts becoming part of the paradigm so that people start, it's you talk about accessible housing, right? And every time that comes up, I ask how many of those I'm sorry, how many of those um, affordable housing units that you're building under this grant that you got are also accessible?
Mm.
Because I think if we just think about it up front, then it doesn't have to be an issue. I mean, I hope there's a point in time when we don't have to talk about disability. Of course, that's pie in the sky, but I can see Sean is like,
I can guarantee none.
yeah, I
Can you
know.
share a moment where you experienced a space or a tool that got it right, that truly felt built for everyone?
I saw that question and I don't know that I have the answer to it specifically, but I'll tell you about something. I don't know. Is it okay for me to talk about something that I've been working on? And I mentioned it before we started recording. Um, I think the city of Bozeman is getting more active in trying to be inclusive and inclusive to everybody, not just people with disabilities, but people of different gender identities and different races, whatever, religions. Um, and as such, they have a grant. So they have there's different boards and whatever. And the city has an and um, urban parks and forestry board. And they recently created a grant funding, $220,000 to meet out to propose, for proposals. Um, and it's a sort of broad, they want it to be things that speak to, they have a whole plan on what they want to see their parks and forests to be, and
Hmm.
sustainable, inclusive. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but um, my friend Lizanne, who is has a spinal cord injury, she's paralyzed, I think, from like here down, um, and so like from her chest down, and so she uses a manual wheelchair, and and she's very active. She teaches Pilates. She cross country skis. She kicks my butt cross country skiing, I should say, in a sit ski. Um, and anyway, she got up at, well, she didn't get up, but she spoke up at a city commission meeting a little over a year ago about the fact that she lives half a block away from this park where they have a farmer's market every Tuesday night in the summer. And the area in this park where they have it is maintained. There's all these big, tall trees. They're beautiful. You okay, Sean? Okay. Um, and so um, the ground is maintained with uh, bark mulch, which is and
Mm.
like large, so it's very soft and it's just not conducive to wheelchairs or any real devices, mobility devices, strollers, wagons. And this farmers market is tended by like I don't know, a lot of people every Tuesday night, and she can't go there, and she's a half a block away. Um, and so she spoke up at this commission meeting and said, I can't go to the farmers market. Well, the city doesn't, I mean, they have control over the park, but the farmers market is its own thing. That's another story. But anyway, as a result of that, the city contacted our meeting. So Liz Ann's also on the board for Ability Montana with me, and um, she they contacted our ADA specialist, the Parks Department did, and we have. written a grant, and this is what I was so busy with last week. We had to go and uh, present our plan. We'd already written the proposal. Then we had to go present it to the board. And so that's what I did Thursday night with Lizanne. And I actually made a video um, with captioning. I was very proud of myself. I got the captioning in. And it was so funny because we went thinking, so she had shoulder surgery, so she can't use her manual chair, but we used her manual chair and her friend pushed her. And and it was really hard for her friend. It was really, really hard, even just pushing her on the chair. We thought the video was just going to be like a couple seconds of that. I found a woman in a scooter, a woman using a cane, a woman using like a rollator, kind of like a walker type thing. All of them, and I interviewed them all. Oh, and a woman using walking sticks for her back, and all of them said that this was not good for their mobility. And so we have proposed building some accessible trails so that everybody can access the farmers market and other things that happen in that area of the park. So
That's amazing.
I forgot what the question was.
You went there. You said the question was, can you share a moment where you experienced a space or tool that got it right, that truly felt built for everyone, and you didn't quite have an experience that you experienced, but you are making that experience for other people. I think
I
that's the
hope
best
so. I
thing.
hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah, I hope so.
yeah,
We haven't heard. I mean, it's going to be a month before we hear, um, but yeah, I mean, I'll let you know. I'm excited
great.
about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, just going into kind of that same theme, how do you speak up for newer buildings that don't have accessibility as a main thought in their design, but more so of an afterthought? This can be in your local community, in your government.
Hmm. I have not had that experience, to be honest. Let me think about this. Actually, there was we don't tend to. I shouldn't say that. Things have been changing around here so fast. I don't know if you know, but this county in Montana is one of the fastest growing counties in the country, um, much to my chagrin. Um, but so I was about to say that we don't tend to raise buildings. I mean, as in demolish them. We have a lot of, when I say old buildings, like I grew up on the East Coast and in New England, and I lived in New England for many years before I moved out here. And so like old here is 100 years old. And I sound like an East Coast snob when I say that, but um, I'm not sure that I've had that experience to, let me think about that. Could you ask the question again, Brandon?
Yeah, how do you speak up for newer buildings that don't have accessibility as a main thought in their design?
Well, I think you have to see, it goes back to that universal design thing that I talked about earlier. I try to, my my goal is to not have that happen, right? So new buildings should not be built without visibility in mind, period. I mean, like so I'm trying to nip it in the bud before it even happens. So, and that probably doesn't exactly answer your question, but that's how I think about it, because there's a lot of construction going on around here, because of the growth and everything. And so, um, I try to remind city commissioners and county commissioners and whoever will listen, that they need to be advocating for and finding ways to, I don't think, I mean, I've talked to people about this, it's something that I've wanted to look into, but it's like, it's really not that much more expensive to make a building or even a housing unit, which is not susceptible to the ADA, if it's just a housing unit. If it's a public housing unit, yes, but um, they it's not that much harder to make a building ADA accessible, you
Mhm.
know, and that much more. I mean, it is maybe a little bit more expensive. I've been told by some contractors, but at what price? I mean, like, why I think the difference is not that big. And so I think anybody who's building any kind of structure should be thinking about that. And that's
Yeah.
where I'm coming from. I haven't had to fight. Like, so there was this one woman at the Montana Association for the Blind conference. At the end of my talk, she was talking about remember, I think it was might have been the public library in her town, and she was saying that they put in, and oh, I know you're gonna scowl when you hear this because you should. Um, they had put in some kind of access to the building in the back door. Yeah, right. Um, and she wanted to get them to do something with the stairs in the front. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it wasn't even a ramp thing. It was just, or she just wanted them to texturize the steps, I think, so that,
To make them less slippy.
yeah. And, but they already had a ramp in the back or something, and I'm like, they've met the qualifications of ADA, so I'm not sure you're going to be able to like, you know, fight them on it on a legal level, but that doesn't
Hmm.
mean you can't fight for it.
Right. Right. I think the message here is to speak up and use your voice. And um, yeah.
Ooh, ooh, when you just said that reminded me of something. My Center for Independent Living has a podcast that y'all should be listening to. It's so good, although it is somewhat localized, but it's called Disability Voices, and it's run by two of our independent living specialists, and they're brilliant. Well, three now. They're brilliant. It's just they've actually were watching the state legislature because part of we haven't talked about much about centers for independent living yet, but um, part of our and actually the reason we were founded was because of advocacy. Um, so that's part of an independent living specialist job, is to be an advocate. And so they went to they went to the state capitol and reported on the bills that we needed to write to our legislators about and keep on top of. So, I mean, I think that's another way. Like, if you don't feel like you want to like actually use your so-called verbal voice, you're out, this that I'm using now. There are other ways, writing about it, writing to your legislators. It's more important now than ever.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
forgot what the question was again.
Speaking about writing and speaking about putting out information, tell me about your newsletter, More Than Normal, Breaking Down Barriers of Disability. What is it about and what do you focus on as you write?
I think the title says it more, says it pretty succinctly. But I'm not very good. I'm not very, what's the word, regular with it. I do it when I feel compelled, and I am feeling compelled. I just haven't been able to find the time lately. I'll probably write about this at some point, once once this is out, so that I could put a link on to it. In that, if I'm feeling like I need to get a newsletter out, I'll look at the news. There's lots to write about these days, as you know. Um, but like just recently, there's another newsletter on Substack, and I think it's called Disability. No, that's Stella Fong, um, or Stella Wong, or oh my God, I'm having a brain fart. Do you know who I'm talking about? Stella Wong, I think is her name. Is that right? Disability Visibility. Um,
Mm.
but that's not who I'm thinking of. So somebody else has a Substack, and I apologize to her for not remembering who it is. But she wrote there was so I'm gonna leave you with something good here. Well, not that we're necessarily done, but um, there was a young lady who lived someplace, and this young lady, she's a school kid, and she has epilepsy, really severe epilepsy, and she has like seizure after seizure after seizure in the mornings, but they tend to calm down in the afternoons. So the school district where she was living um, provided her like so she would go to school in the afternoons, and then they provided her with in-home um, education, to make up for the time that she missed in the mornings because she couldn't go to school in the mornings. And then they
And
moved.
and this is Stella Young, the one who did the TED Talk, right?
Oh, no, that's somebody else. But she's the one. That's the inspiration point. I'm messing up names. So, oh, apologies. I'm feeling terrible
No,
now.
that totally could have been my fault.
No, no, no. Disability Visibility is the name of her. I'll find her. She did a compilation of essays. Um, and she's a speaker too. And she has a podcast, and I can't think of her name. Anyway, but this other woman who has a Substack, she wrote about this young lady with epilepsy. Well, her family moved away from that school system that was providing her the required, under IDEA Act, education, free and accessible education, and
Hmm.
appropriate education. When she moved, the new school district refused to provide that for her. Her family sued, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, I think it was last week or the week before, ruled in her favor.
Oh, wow. That's great.
I know. I mean, but but here's the thing: she shouldn't have had to do that. She should have
Right.
been able to say, her parents should have been able to say, this is what my daughter needs. This is the least restrictive environment for her to learn in, which is what the law says, that every child um, is not permitted, is has the right to an education regardless of disability in, and this is the key, in the least restrictive environment. So we're not institutionalizing kids that don't need to be institutionalized. And there's like different levels. And so they shouldn't have had to fight for that. And the
Yeah.
fact
And
that they had
with,
to go all the way to the Supreme Court, it just gets my ire.
right. And with this Supreme Court, that's a nice surprise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I know.
What photos have you found for your articles?
I generally use my own. I'm a photographer as well as so I have a great, the last one I wrote was about I think there's a photo. I took Tom Olin's, for those of you who don't know who Tom Olin is, he's a photographer that shot the Capitol crawl and the 504 demonstrations and all that in Berkeley. All his photos were in black and white. And so I took his lead, and we had a rally, a 504 rally at our Capitol in Helena here in Montana. And I shot photos there. And so that photo is prominent on that. I think I wrote about that. And so that's the photo I used. Mostly I use my own photos. Sometimes I'll use just found photos on Unsplash or whatever it is that's attached to Substack. Most of the time it's my own. Well, no, I'd say about half the time. Depends on what I'm writing about.
That's cool. Is there anything else as we kind of come to a close? Is there anything else that you want to discuss today that we didn't touch on, or do you have any questions for me?
Oh, I have so many questions for you, Sean, but I'm not going to take up time here. We should talk offline about a bunch of stuff. But and Brandon, you too, because at the beginning of this conversation, Brandon was telling me he's starting a nonprofit for people with disabilities. So I want to talk to you. Um, but um, yeah, I guess I just want to clarify because I thought we were going to talk about that, and I don't know that I spoke about this. I mean, I know I keep mentioning Centers for Independent Living. I didn't get a chance to look up how many there are across the country, but it's fascinating to me how many people don't know that these exist. And it's a little bit of a misnomer because when people think of Centers for Independent Living, they think we're a place. We
Hmm.
have offices, but we're not a place. We are um, a group, an organization. So there are four in the whole state of Montana, that covers a lot of counties. We have 54 counties in the state. We're a huge state. Um, but what our our mission is, what the institute, what the center CILs do is, we don't provide the resources for people, but we help them find the resources they need, whatever it is they need to live independently in their community and avoid institutionalization. And actually, we excuse me, we've just started this new thing. Just getting underway. I just learned about this last week at our board meeting, our quarterly board meeting. So I had that on top of everything else last week. Um, that there's a thing that's called Money Stays with You, or something, I don't remember, but there's a woman that's currently institutionalized in Butte. So she's in a nursing home or what, or a rehab facility or something like that. And she wants to live in her own house. She wants to live in her own facility, like in her own home. And she just was able to buy a condo. I'm sure she had some help somehow. I don't know. So they're going through the process of helping her furnish it and find the personal care attendants she might need, make the space accessible for her, whatever is needed. So the deinstitutionalization of people is something that we're just starting to embark on at my own, at my own Center for Independent Living. But we're an advocacy organization. We have peer programs. We have our CIL has a recreation program. So we do skiing, and we just were deeded some property in Ennis. Here's another thing you can do, Sean. Come out and fish with us. We could take you on the river, even if you're in a power chair. Um, so totally cool. Yeah, it's
That's
amazing.
amazing.
It's really, really cool. It's called Camp Bullwheel, and that became the person who owned the property and built, or however, I don't know how, but he had all these rafts and boats that you could actually roll a power chair out onto, and float the river. Um, so that was just given to us at the beginning of this year. We've been running the program there for a couple of years, and even longer than that, it's been going on. But anyway, so
That's
the
phenomenal.
recreation program, yeah, the recreation program is not something that most CILs do. But to be honest with you, it's kind of a great way to raise money because it's more sexy than saying, "Oh, we help people find personal care attendants." They're like, "Yes, so what?" So it's, but yeah, if you, and so anytime I hear of somebody who has a disability or has a family member who has a disability, I look up the CIL in their region, in their area, and I send them the link because I think people don't recognize how helpful these organizations, and we're not the panacea, we're not the silver bullet, you know what I mean? Um, but we are here to help. And so I would really
That's a
encourage
great
people to look
resource.
into them. Yeah, it really is. And they're everywhere. They're all over the country. That's my
Great
little
knowledge. Thank you for sharing.
that's my little spiel for CILs.
Thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. I appreciate all the insights you shared. Before we wrap, if people want to connect with you or support what you do, where can they find you, Jodi?
My website is jodihausen.com. It's JODIHAUSEN .com. And you'll
Awesome.
see
Thank you.
my journalism work, my photographic work, some of my radio work, or audio work, and I'll probably put that video I talked about earlier up eventually. Um, and my newsletter. There's a tab there, upper right hand corner.
Great. I'll make sure everything is linked in the description below. Once again, I'm Sean Gold. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. And make sure and hit the bell if you're notified when the new episodes of Crippled by Culture go live. See you next time.
Thanks, Sean.
Want to listen to Crippled by Culture on your favorite podcast platform? Well, now you can. Crippled by Culture is now available wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search up the show title and make sure you subscribe. Thank you for being a listener.